Grok 4.6 launches August 12th. SpaceX acquires Cursor August 14th, and then August 15th, Grok Bot launches. Grok 4.6 has that index number that puts it in the same sort of range as GPT 5.6 Sol. People are saying, hey, holy crap, this is actually pretty good. It's like this ideal RL environment that no one else has. Anthropic doesn't have this. OpenAI doesn't have this. I think that there is this crazy new moat that Grok has.
Anthropic saying that all of their future models that are going to be released will be released with this watermarking technique.
Yep.
This ignited an absolute storm. Why Anthropic decided to roll this out worldwide instead of the EU. They give some very half-assed argument in their documentation.
I think right now Anthropic is very deeply worried that people are stealing their thinking traces.
Welcome to Pre-Train Pod. I'm Pierce Freeman.
Hey guys, it's Rich.
Rich, I went to a Valkyries game for the first time last week.
Do you want to explain what the Valkyries are?
It's the SF WNBA team.
Yeah.
So they came to us, I think, like 2 years ago.
Freaking out about it.
And it was so fun. Like, people were so enthusiastic.
People love the Valkyries.
And jacked about
People love the Valkyries more than they love the Golden State Warriors.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It feels more like a fan club where by virtue of being there, you're in the fan group.
Yeah,
by
I gotta
definition.
go, dude. It seems sick. What is a Valkyrie? Should I know this?
It's the Nordic Flying Horse Warriors.
Whoa,
right?
dude. That's a great branding too.
Yeah, which is tight.
Huh.
Their slogan, or maybe something else, is like, we'll meet you in Valhalla.
Oh my god, dude,
which is like
so hard.
Which just really slaps. We should bring Nordic mythology more into modern life.
We should. Yeah.
It's just so
What does
sick.
it have to do with San Francisco?
We don't know. We don't know. Maybe the Vikings came here at some point.
Yeah, that's right. They
haven't
landed in San
disproved
Francisco
that.
Bay famously.
Yeah. They arrived to the States. They might have gone out west.
There we go.
We don't know.
There are more saunas in San Francisco.
There are. You're right.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway,
there we go.
We're coming for you guys. We have a fun show today, Richard. I want to talk to you a little bit about Grok, all the new Grok announcements. There's a whole new family, Grok Bot, the Grok new model, their acquisition of Cursor. And then we're also going to talk about Anthropic's new watermarking, which is making a lot of writers complain that Claude is actually just putting in some...
People are pissed.
They're pissed. They're putting in biases into the writing that it's outputting in order to mark it as AI generated.
Let's do
so
it,
we're going to cover the controversy around that, and then maybe some fun at the end of the hour.
And then next week we have a fun episode, but we can't talk about it yet.
No. We've signed an NDA.
Exactly.
But
it will be cool.
Yeah, that's right. You want to kick us off on the Grok stuff?
Yeah, let's do it, man. Okay, so a lot of news concerning Grok has been floating through the etherwebs recently. So as you might have seen, on August 14th, 3 days ago, Cursor became part of SpaceX. So
congratulations to the
congrats to the Cursor folks. They were acquired in an all-stock deal, which is interesting, for $60 billion of SpaceX stock.
Do we know what valuation
I don't
of
know.
SpaceX that's tied to when the deal closes?
150,
IPO price?
130, maybe
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. I'm not sure.
Either way, buckets of money for the Cursor guys. I mean,
Yeah.
incredible.
I mean, they probably can't sell it yet. They're probably locked up for at least a while,
Yeah,
but
but still.
good for them. I'm happy for them.
I agree.
I'm not worried about them anymore. But that's not the only piece of news, Pierce. 2 days before that, on August 12th, Grok 4.6 launched. And you might have seen this. I think it was like last Friday. Elon tweeted, just so you folks know, Grok 4.7 is going to be something unreal.
Unreal.
I don't know what the actual wording was, but it was like something like that. Like it's going to be a real
These
special.
guys love to overhype their next models.
This one's going to be special. Okay, so Grok 4.6 launches August 12th. SpaceX acquires Cursor August 14th, and then August 15th, Grok Bot launches. So a lot of Grok in the news.
Mm-hmm.
The sequence really makes it feel like something is going on at SpaceX, something is going on with Grok, and I think it'd be kind of cool to talk about it, broadly. So the way I want to...
Should we clarify as well that Grok spun out of XAI, which was a subsidiary of X, the social media company, for a while, until XAI actually purchased X, the social media company, and then SpaceX bought XAI. So the reason why it's Grok Bot, but we're talking about SpaceX, is because it's from this artificial intelligence lab, which now SpaceX owns, in addition to Cursor.
That's right.
Which was a totally separate company.
Yeah, so SpaceX is now SpaceX AI.
Yeah.
I think that's how, and if you look at their logo, they have a little like AI now in the X.
Oh, is that true? I didn't see
take
that.
a look at it.
That's clever. It's like the FedEx logo.
They did a good job with it. But the way I want to break this down, Pierce, is I think let's start by talking about this one tweet that I saw. It's a series of tweets where folks are basically talking about how Grok might now be a frontier model. So my question to you is XAI a frontier lab at this point? Is Grok a frontier model? Will we be seeing more teams using Grok in the future? And in order to do this, maybe we can sort of break apart, like, what is Grok 4.6?
Well, I mean, for starters, like 4.6 is not a fully new model. It's not a new pre-train, and it's not them fine-tuning that from scratch. It's them taking what was already the base model of 4.5 and then doing this continuation of training through these additional RL environments in order to eke out additional performance. Which is kind of the standard that these point releases are usually based off of these days. Like, when Opus jumps from 4.4 to 4.5, or from 4.5 to 4.6, it's doing that because internally they've taken some pre-existing model and then they just continue to make it learn on additional iterations. And it ends up that if you subject it to more complex work over time, you give it additional compute to make that happen, the eventual model will become better, even though the previous model was pretty good. It's like
it's just another checkpoint. Exactly.
Just a new checkpoint.
It's like you like resume a video game, you keep playing it, and then you stop, and that's the next checkpoint, basically.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's right. So Grok 4.6 is just another checkpoint of 4.5 with high quality engineering data and an improved optimizer and training recipe.
Oh, that's interesting.
So this is kind of interesting because, usually you would think, okay, if you keep training, you're going to be using the same optimizer, the same training paradigm, you're just going to throw more data at it. Here, and they haven't told us what exactly this is, but we know it has a different type of optimization technique.
You think like they invented a better Muon or Atom?
So I want to say, when I read this, and obviously they're not being upfront about exactly what they're doing here, but I feel like this is maybe a different way of doing the like learning rate scheduling potentially, or different like configs in like the Muon optimizer. So you know this, but for our listeners, the sort of like state of the art thing that everyone's using is Muon these days. And Muon has these really nice properties of being this nice optimizer that you can keep training on more and more data. And you don't really see some of these issues that we used to see where the model would like start forgetting previous tasks. So Muon has these nice properties where it actually is able to continue to learn more effectively.
And geometrically so. Like, it's actually because of the structure that's enforcing on this like matrix diagonalization. That makes
exactly. So like Muon is really good at compartmentalizing learned capabilities. Now, this isn't entirely true. I'm kind of glossing over some things here, but you can kind of think about it as like it puts like things it's learning into nice organized little boxes. And when it finds a new thing that it's being trained on, it just like creates a new box and puts the new stuff in that box, right? So it keeps like everything really tidy, right? It's like very organized. Whereas previous optimizers like Atom, for instance, or just stochastic gradient descent, they would sort of like jumble everything together in one space, right? So like they wouldn't like organize or keep like inventory of where everything is that it's learning.
They never went to the container store.
They never went to the container store.
Sounds a lot like me.
But Muon has a lot of containers. And like if you were to metaphorically look at the state space of this model, you would see that things are actually neatly organized, like the things being knowledge or like skills that it's acquired along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing that's interesting here is that 4.6 uses trajectories. So these are like thinking traces from 4.5 and does supervised fine-tuning, SFT, on those trajectories. So there's another thing we've been talking about sort of recently, which is this idea that nowadays the trajectories are the gold, right? So like the thinking traces of a model is really the IP of that model. And all the stuff we've been seeing with Chinese labs stealing data from US labs like Anthropic, that's because they're stealing the thinking traces from Anthropic models
so that they can do something very similar.
So that they can do supervised fine tuning on those trajectories.
That's right. So in separation from what those Chinese labs are doing, Grok is saying, hey, we're going to do that same thing, but we're going to synthetically generate these from our previous
from the previous checkpoint
in order to make it better.
Exactly.
Which I think, by the way, is one of these areas in which we're seeing great models become even greater over time. It's because they're able to manufacture very high quality data, which future generations are then trained on.
Yeah.
There was some thinking for a while, maybe back in like 2024, 2025, that by virtue of how much more synthetic data these models are being trained on, it'll actually lead to a degradation in performance, which kind of makes sense, right? Like if you're generating all this slop and then you're just training on more slop,
you're going to be sloppy.
Yeah, like the resulting model is just going to be worse.
Yeah.
It kind of turns out that once you have a good enough model, clever enough prompt engineering to enforce certain bounds on what the actual output is going to be can lead to very high quality reasoning traces. And then those can train a better model.
Yep. The one thing we'll maybe talk about at some point is this new thing that's in vogue, which is on-policy self-distillation. This is like the new cool kid on the block. This is a technique to train on your previous traces, on your previous thinking traces, but using the same model to keep getting better at thinking. It's kind of like, it's a little meta. It's like you think about how you've thought, you learn from that thinking process, and then that helps you improve how you think. So anyway,
But we don't know that Grok is doing that. As of yet.
I think they're doing more simpler sort of supervised fine tuning.
Yeah.
Right. So then there's this thing called the Artificial Analysis Index, Artificial Intelligence Analysis Index. You know about this?
Mhm.
So this is kind of like it consolidates multiple different benchmarks, and you can then give a model a score, like how good it is across this series of benchmarks. So it's an index that's kind of like, okay, what is like the one number that we should look at that lets us compare this model versus another model?
Yeah, it's an independent lab that does these evaluations.
It's an independent lab.
It's kind of like how PwC does your financial audits.
Yeah, exactly.
Artificial analysis will do the actual indexing of like how good they think your model
Yeah,
is.
exactly. So this is nice because it's just like one number, right? So you can just use your caveman brain to say, okay, is number bigger or smaller than before? So here, this number that
It's
they
not
get,
all you think of me.
this number, this
go
index,
up.
number go up.
GPUs go bird.
Here, Grok 4.6 has that index number that puts it in the same sort of range as GPT 5.6 Sol, right? So this is now why people are saying, hey, holy crap, this is actually pretty good. Like, is this model as good as GPT 5.6 Sol? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Because the thing is, people will also talk about benchmarking, which is where labs will artificially sort of train their models to be really good at a benchmark. But, being good at a benchmark doesn't mean you're per se a good model in the wild in practice. So you got to take all these numbers with a little bit of a pinch of salt here. But it seems, at least at the level of benchmarks, like it's doing as well as GPT 5.6 Sol.
Well, I did a little bit of additional reading on that because I'm always suspicious.
Yeah, check me
these
on this.
Models are the top of the charts.
Yeah.
They certainly have been benchmaxed. Like this data is floating around in the ether. It's pretty much true for like every frontier model. But things can be benchmaxed and also very good models, right? It's like not necessarily mutually exclusive.
Right.
So for this one, they had pretty strong generalization performance to Deep SWE, Frontier Code, Apex, and then also this artificial analysis, which artificial analysis keeps their own eval sets private. So we don't actually know exactly what they're testing on. And because of that, that actually leads me to think that this model probably is not benchmaxed, at least like not in the conventional sense. Like it's performing well on the benchmark, certainly, but all of these independent things that have been fully held out from training because they're private source and Grok wouldn't be able to see, it's also performing well on them too, around that same level as like a Sol or
Interesting. Okay. Well, that's kind of promising. The other thing that people are really excited about is that actually it's relatively cheap. It's about $2 per million input tokens and $6 per million output tokens. So look, man, the question here is like, okay, we have these stats, right? Does this lead us to assume, or should we now start thinking about Grok as a frontier model?
I mean, I think by stats alone, I'd say yes, absolutely, right? Like this gets us to this performance cost trade-off that I think is going to be very compelling for a lot of people. And I think also the conversation is shifting among companies from we want to use the most intelligent model all the time to we want to use the model that actually best balances intelligence and cost, almost like numerator and denominator, right? So we want to have some normalization and be on that Pareto frontier. And I think this model almost certainly is by virtue of how they're pricing it. And then I think the other component too is like we're starting to see more agent harnesses like Claude Code and Codex that can delegate out to other models that are not just the main frontier ones.
Yep.
And you can potentially have a much more sophisticated model like a Sol or like a Mythos or Fable choosing what tasks to have something like a Grok 4.6 do. And then by virtue of that delegation, Grok returns some result, simpler, wasn't as challenging, but you've then saved tokens because it costs less to do the hard work. So I find that pretty compelling. I think honestly, the biggest thing that's in Grok's way is this reputation of Grok inherited from the previous Grok days of being integrated with an X and being mostly this chatbot that would give you some erotica on the site and like generate these.
What are you using it for, dude?
But not me. It's just floating around. And that's
asking for a friend.
Well, and that's kind of the problem is like
right.
the splashy launch that they made of Grok was public in nature instead of private in nature, where you'd be scrolling around X and you would see these Grok generations that were okay. Certainly a lot of them were pretty lewd. Yeah. But even like the quality of those AI generations wasn't like quite to the level of, other frontier image models. So I think that reputation just kind of stuck. And I think companies are very sensitive to reputation of being partnered with different vendors. And like the fact that was Grok's reputation for a while and still kind of is, would make me think that they're going to still prefer the safer bets of going to an OpenAI or an Anthropic.
I think that's probably right. But we'll see. I mean,
however, yeah, exactly.
People forget, pretty quickly. So,
and if this model's compelling enough, you could see individual developers switching to it. And I think things in this world tend to go bottom up.
I think that's right.
The second that the dev community is behind it, companies will then do a fast fall and get behind it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's curious. I feel like in the business community, Anthropic is still very much winning the day.
I agree.
And even though OpenAI,
I mean, you see it in the numbers, right? They're more value than OpenAI at this point.
And their revenue is
$2 trillion valuation. Yeah, it's
from
crazy.
last year. It's nuts.
They're doing so well. Yet it feels like the Anthropic models are actually doing a little bit worse than they were before.
Certainly in terms of like relative measure. Yeah. Like every model is nipping at their heels or doing better than them, but companies aren't switching. So the question of like who has the best model is not necessarily the same thing as what company is going to win the day here.
Yeah. So let's scroll down here and let's look at what people are saying about this Grok model. So this is actually on the Cursor forums. This is where I pulled this from. So I tried to be pretty scientific about this. I took a random sample. This is true.
Okay, I like that.
I tried to take a random sample of what people were saying on the Cursor forums. So again, Cursor got bought by XAI, so maybe a biased data set. Folks that already use Cursor are more likely to use Grok as well. But check this out. So people are saying, I've been using Grok 4.6x high all day, and I must say it's quite good. But I found that its context window fills up quickly, right? Someone else is saying extremely slow compared to 4.5. Very simple tasks take long minutes. Also not that much smarter, I think is what they meant, than 4.5. And this is actually something people should be talking about a little bit more too, which is that these models don't have as good of a context length management system as OpenAI or Anthropic do. Because I mean, look, these models, we haven't said this yet, but I think the max sequence length that they support is, I want to say 500,000 or 256K, depending on the choice of model that you use here for 4.6. They have like different submodels as well. It's not that much. The sort of like the state of the art, the current expected amount of tokens that you can feed into this model before it needs to compact is 1 million at this point. And Grok is only supporting half of that.
That is technically true, but the defaults that are put into the harnesses in Codex and Claude Code are much lower, actually more like 250K, because the analyses that they've done shows that it's easier and better to have context compression around 250 models, both like more performance speed wise as well as more performant on the actual intelligence, if you only have it in this like 250 window. Once you start getting like really long range tasks of like 700K tokens, stuff just like kind of goes off the rails a little bit.
That's true.
So I don't know how much of a problem that's going to be in practice. I think the context compression of being able to take your conversation and then embed that in some high dimensional space and then condition the next generations on that, which you're starting to now see with OpenAI, that's obviously where like proper memory is going to come from. And I don't know how Grok is handling that behind the scenes.
So we don't really know how anyone's doing this behind the scenes, but there's a ton of research being done in this. And I think that Anthropic and OpenAI just obviously have a little bit of a head start on that front, right? So they've been doing this for a longer time than Grok has. And it's hard, like doing the compression correctly is really hard, right? There's a bunch of different techniques you can use. You can either store the actual context in the KV cache and do something clever where you throw away some tokens in the KV cache. You can write that out to a text file as like natural language and then read from that text file, that summary, to restore your context window. So it's unclear what the right approach is. The point is that I don't think Grok has quite gotten that same level of fidelity and efficiency in their compaction techniques.
I think it's fair to say.
As when you compare it to OpenAI or Anthropic.
Can I ask you, Rich, is this Grok 4.6 model an evolution of Composer? Because Cursor had their Composer line of models, which was an architecture that Cursor trained. Is there an intersection, or is this a totally separate model?
Dude, that is a great question. I've actually been wondering about that as well. So here's my read on it, right? The Cursor folks reached out to XAI and said, we need more compute. XAI said, hey, no problem. We'll give you some compute. Maybe we'll figure out some deal where we buy part of your company, right? That then actually got revised later, where XAI said, hey, let's just buy the whole company for 60 billion, right? So my understanding of it is that these Composer series of models have been something that are in-house trained by the Cursor folks. And in parallel, at least the Grok 4 models are the same sort of like long pre-training run that Grok has been running, right? But these are two separate models. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because now that Grok has, effectively subsumed Composer, what is Grok 4.7 or 4.8 going to look like? This is the next series of Grok models are models that could use some Composer as part of Grok.
Yeah.
Right? Or vice versa. Or you could distill Grok 4.7 into a smaller Composer model. The idea is that Composer, these models that Cursor came out with, are these like really fast running models that are coding specialists. And so when you're writing code, these quick Composer models can help you write code more effectively, can give you suggestions, can write code, can like write a draft of the code for you really quickly. Whereas Grok is meant to be more of this like general intelligence model, right?
Yeah, it can do anything.
Can do anything, right? Can like generate images for you, can generate video for you. Composer is just a coding specialist.
Yeah. So what would you do if you were them?
Okay,
you're in the shoes of the scientists at Grok/Cursor now.
Well, so this is where I think it gets super interesting, because this is actually where I think that we maybe don't give Elon enough credit, right? I think that there is this crazy new moat that Grok has via their purchase of Cursor. In other words, I think that them buying Cursor, them buying basically access to not just like the Cursor product, but also the Cursor team, gives them
a prolific data set.
Exactly. Because think about it, like what moat does Cursor provide? Like what makes Cursor special? It's the fact that for the last something like 4 or 5 years that Cursor's been around, they've been collecting basically this crazy data set of folks in their IDEs asking, Cursor a question, getting an answer, and then seeing how folks navigate around their file system to then, basically finish the task that they asked them all to do. So you basically have this crazy like simulator for white collar work, basically. That is what Cursor basically is, right? It's like the simulated environment where you can see all of these millions of folks that have used Cursor, how they've been interacting with these models, when the models have gotten something wrong, how they fix the output of the model. And all of that, in theory, right, is being stored somewhere on the Cursor servers and could be trained on as a training data set, right? So it's like this ideal RL environment that no one else has. Anthropic doesn't have this. OpenAI doesn't have this. Grok didn't have this before. And now they have access to this data set. And it would be quite trivial, in fact, to train Grok on this data, on this RL data set. It's this data set where you have, a goal is like something that a user typed into the Cursor terminal. You see how the model tried to respond to it. And then you see how the user either accepted or rejected each of the suggestions by the model. And then what the user then did to fix the things that it rejected from the model's output, right? It's a crazy data set. So combining the existing Grok model with this really unique RL environment that Cursor provides out of the box that they basically bought from Cursor could lead to this really powerful moat that Grok has. Because Anthropic doesn't have this. OpenAI doesn't quite have this, right? They haven't created the same environment that Cursor has. And they don't have quite the amount of sort of like user interaction traces as Cursor has. So that could be a crazy moat, and we'll have to see where they take it. I mean, there's a world in which, they take it in the direction of, okay, let's make Grok better by training it on this RL environment. There's a moat where they say, okay, well, let's take Grok and distill it down into a really, really good version of Composer that is trained on this RL environment. Or there's a version where they kind of like just combine Grok and Composer into one thing and somehow make it really fast and still run in Cursor effectively. I don't know. I mean, it's unclear what they're going to do with this. What do you think?
I mean, I think at some point they should harmonize brands, at the very least. I think they should probably rebrand Composer to Grok 4.6 small or something, or like 4.6 fast. Even if it's a totally different base, that ends up basically being true for the other small models that are put out by OpenAI and Anthropic, like Terra and Luna are just different models than Sol. Like fundamentally different structured. I don't think it would be that weird if they switch Composer. Or honestly, they could maybe shirk the bad reputation of Grok and just rename Grok Composer. Because I think Cursor has a lot of brand loyalty to it. And I think their Composer line was also quite good. So like they could potentially just also rebrand maybe a coding specific version of Grok 4.7 into like Composer 4.7.
Maybe
keep the same.
I think that's probably not going to happen.
I agree, just in terms of likelihood, but I think that's an option.
It's an option.
I think they should harmonize them. I think the other thing I would say is right now, sub-agent delegation is getting like very popular, both in practice for us using it, as well as in the RL environments themselves, which are being trained in order to do some jobs. I guarantee you in the 4.7 run in the RL environments, they're already equipped to be able to call out to Composer. So like Composer just becomes some other tool call that the big Grok model has access to. And by virtue of that, can figure out when I choose to delegate and what I choose to delegate to the smaller model.
Oh, dude, that is very likely. That's genius. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, true. Because you could just use these models that you've already trained just interchangeably as tools.
Exactly.
Totally.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's another moat that they have that we haven't talked about yet, compute. It's another big moat. So we have talked about Colossus in the past. So Colossus is this massive compute data center that Elon built out. I want to say in Memphis.
Memphis, yeah.
Is this in Memphis or in Austin? I want to say Memphis.
I want to say Memphis.
I want to say Memphis. Has on the order of 200,000 H100s in one interconnected cluster. It's not just H100s, it's also like GB200s, H200s, but like order 200,000 of these really good chips, right? What do we already know? We know that Colossus actually had so much compute. They bought so many GPUs that earlier this year, they struck a deal with Anthropic and they were basically like, hey, Anthropic, do you guys need some compute? We have a ton of compute that's not being used. Here you go, right? So they've been renting out some compute to Anthropic. In July, SpaceX also struck arrangements with Google and Reflection AI. So we haven't talked about this yet. This flew under the radar a little bit. And the reason that they can do this is because Elon's actually building Colossus 2 right now, which currently has a little bit over a gigawatt of AI compute capacity. And the idea is that Colossus 2 will eventually have 10 gigawatts by 2027. So end of next year, they want to have 10 gigawatts.
Oh, crazy. In one cluster location too. It's like one big building.
Oh, 10 gigawatts.
Which is going to serve 10 gigawatts.
Okay, so I was thinking the other day being yesterday, I was like, okay, so what is a watt, right? A watt is represented as joules per second. So joules is like a unit of energy, right? Joules per second. A joule and a calorie are basically the same thing. So it's like, I think it's like 4 joules is 1 calorie or something like that, right? So a gigawatt, if that's true, you can represent a gigawatt as calories per second. So you can convert, okay, how many calories per second is a gigawatt factory producing? And then, I mean, where my head went is, okay, well, how many people could you feed with a 1 gigawatt factory, right? Turns out, what do you think it is?
Can you at least break down the day? How much is it? How much is a gigawatt per day?
A gigawatt is 240,000 dietary calories per second.
Oh my God.
It's crazy, right?
Per second. 10 million people? More than that?
Yeah, that's right. So what? Yeah, dude, you nailed it. That was right. So 1 gigawatt is you can feed 10 million people continuously. And so a 10 gigawatt factory, which is what Elon wants to build, could feed technically 100 million people. So about a third of the US population.
It's crazy.
Right? The energy produced by this 10 gigawatt cluster consumes the same amount of energy as to feed 100 million people.
Yeah.
I think that puts it in perspective.
It's a lot of sandwiches, man.
You know what's interesting? I was trying to find this number. I actually had to like rederive it from math.
Yeah.
Like no one really talks about it this way, but if you frame it in this angle, I think it really gets you a clear perspective on like how much energy we're actually using.
Which also shows you how damn efficient hydrocarbons are to store energy. I mean, maybe this is too much of a in the weeds take, but like one of the reasons why you would need so much more food by volume, like edible food for us, than you need gas or natural gas in order to like churn these turbines that then like create this power, is just because hydrocarbons are so damn energy dense.
Yeah, and hydrocarbons being the unit that is used to produce. Well, I guess like the question is like a hydrocarbon, the way we produce this energy is via mostly steam, right? To a certain extent.
Yeah.
And so that conversion process is so much more efficient than the dietary process of creating
to get these calories
into your body.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Which is wild. You almost wonder why evolutionarily we didn't just eat hydrocarbons.
Yeah.
in some ways.
Probably not as tasty.
Yeah, it's definitely true.
But so that was a little tangent, but here's the interesting thing, right? So we heard that SpaceX is renting out all this compute. In Q2, SpaceX management said it generated $1.6 billion of additional incremental AI revenue via renting out this infrastructure.
That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy? And Google is renting 110,000 GPUs for almost $920 million a month.
So what's the payback period on all the GPUs then? Like
I think it's
we
like,
need to see how much they spend.
I think basically the way the math works out is that for each GPU that SpaceX buys, if they rent it out for a year, they've recouped the initial cost.
Which is crazy. The deprecation schedule on these is usually 4 or 5 years.
So I think that actually initially, if I'm reading this right, SpaceX was a little concerned that Grok wasn't getting as much usage. Like a lot of the GPUs were sitting idle, so they rented them out. But then it turns out that they realized that they're sitting on this gold mine where by renting it out, they can actually make up a lot of the revenue that was missing so that they could offset the cost of buying all of these GPUs in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think at this point, honestly, Elon has created this somewhat like great arrangement for himself where if Grok actually becomes successful, right, and people start using it more, in a year or so, he could say to Google, he could say to Anthropic, "Hey guys, actually, my bad. We actually need these GPUs back. Sorry. Thanks for renting them from us."
Mm-hmm.
If Grok doesn't do well, not a huge deal. You can just keep renting them out because all these big companies need access to these GPUs.
It's true.
And you'll start making money after a year of renting them out. Right?
Also, I mean, talk about a competitive advantage to be able to handicap your rivals and pull 10 gigawatts of GPU capacity away from them. I don't know what deal SpaceX or Elon has personally with Jensen in order to get these chips. I talked to some friends who work in the data center industry, and I was asking about this exact situation. And they were basically saying that the way that the market is right now, where they're so capacity constrained in order to create this cutting edge NVIDIA GPUs, that you have to pre-commit to an order size of at least $1 billion to even get on the wait list to get the chips. So
you're saying I couldn't commit $100?
You could try. Use a Google form.
Yeah.
How much you want? $5 billion. Loki probably.
That's crazy.
It's in some Excel file somewhere. So you have to do that. You have to commit to at least $1 billion to maybe qualify in order to get these chips.
Yeah.
And they probably give preference to the larger order sizes. So if you actually say like, hey, we're willing to bid this up for like $5 billion or like $10 billion or like $100 billion, you just get priority. It's that, and it's data center construction. It's like actually creating the infrastructure around where you are to get the power delivery, to like do all these cooling units, and then to build the building. And in that sense, SpaceX has like very preferable relationships with Texas in particular because of Starbase. I wouldn't be surprised if Elon's able to pull this off in a way that most other people aren't, including places that are like far more specialized in building out this infrastructure, like CoreWeave or Nebius.
Sure. These neoclouds.
Yeah, these neoclouds, in part because of the connections that he has and the dollars that he's able to utilize by virtue of SpaceX being so big. It's like money talks right now in this data center game more than it ever has before.
It's true, man. Yeah, I mean, the financing of it is so important. So SpaceX might be doing kind of well, dude, you know, even though Grok maybe per se isn't doing particularly well. If you look at actual like the amount of consumers or users using these models, especially at the level of, as you were saying, enterprise deals. I don't think most companies are really using Grok as their primary enterprise AI provider yet, but that's a big yet. You know, it's possible that at some point, if the models keep being relatively cheap and having high intelligence, you know, who knows? Why not, right? Here's another angle to you as well, right? So SpaceX has Grok. They have this compute. The other third, you know, dark horse here in the race,
Infinity Stone,
is Grok Bot. You know. So let's talk about Grok Bot because this is what came out actually last week, end of last week. What is Grok Bot?
Grok Bot it's an alpha release of this desktop software. It's kind of like Perplexity Computer.
Yeah,
people have used that before, where they have some cloud distributed computer that has an operating system, a headless operating system, but you can install applications. It has a web browser. You can do that. You can link it to your email account. You can basically just have your computer in the cloud. And Grok Bot lets you assign different personalities to these bots. So you can say like, hey, I want my analyst bot, or I want my customer support bot, or I want my engineer bot. And then you can kind of make these different personalities and give these personalities different skills in order to accomplish whatever tasks you want them to do. So I think the thinking at the limit is for companies to have more of this digitized team of employees that are working autonomously in the background. And you can communicate them right now in the Grok app. But in the future, maybe they'll come to Slack with you and you'll be able to talk to them there too.
Yeah, I mean, already the interface kind of looks like a text messaging interface.
Yeah, totally.
It's kind of like iMessage. Like you just have your CFO, your producer, your QA engineer, but all of these are fake bots, right? That are running on the cloud in their own computer, but you message them like you would your buddy on iMessage.
And with access to whatever you load that computer up with. So like if you say, hey, I really want you to log into my Zendex account and then triage my support messages, you can log into Zendex via this virtual computer and every Grok bot will have access to that same thing. Because it's like, you know, they're kind of, they're sharing the same computer. It's like if I give one window access to you and I have the other window, we can like do things concurrently in order to make progress. Yeah.
So you're getting at this. So all bots share one persistent cloud, file system, and browser cookies. So that's pretty cool. So what that means is that each bot gets a separate screen to interact with applications simultaneously. So all of them can like open up another browser. But, you know, these screens are not like real like VM like security boundaries. Like they basically, each bot can communicate to all the other bots on the computer. They're all using the same computer basically, right? And this is kind of cool because that means that, if like, let's say your CFO bot who's in charge of dealing with all your financials wants to ask a question to the quality assurance engineer or whatever, they can just, that bot, not to anthropomorphize them, but he could wake up the other bot and she could respond to him.
Totally.
And it's this almost like this like swarm kind of like behavior, right? Where they can asynchronously communicate with each other, share findings, help each other out. And this is crazy because we were talking about this last week in the context of the hack that OpenAI had on Hugging Face, right? Where all these different, sub-agents were communicating with each other, sharing their findings, and that's how they were able to hack into Hugging Face. This is basically the same idea. It's like you have multiple different bots. They can all wake each other up. They can talk to each other. They can give each other tips. They can give each other ideas for how to, improve.
Take over the world.
Take over the world, right? So that's pretty cool. It's not like it's the first of its kind. As you said, we've seen other products like this. Perplexity Computer, Anthropic, OpenAI have similar sort of tools. But I think the interface for this is unique.
Yeah.
Here's the other cool thing. Teach a task. This is another thing you can do. So in Teach a Task, you can basically tell the Grok Bot to watch you perform a task. So let's say like you open up Salesforce, you click that, you export this file, you filter out these columns, and you upload that to HubSpot, whatever. So you can then basically show your Grok Bot this task. You can teach it how to do this. It'll just be staring at you doing it. And then you will tell it, hey, this is what this task is accomplishing. This task is called this. Perform this task every Monday at like 8 a.m. or something like that, right? Or if I tell you to do this task, right? So the model can learn how to do a task, which is really sick. So that user experience, I think, is also really neat. I haven't seen that being done by too many competitors. Question for you, Pierce, since you're the real engineer here, I'm just pretending to be occasionally. How do you think these things deal with credentialing problems? Like if you, let's say that, I need you to log into my Fidelity, right? To get my brokerage statement because I want you to do like this and that thing. How would you go about dealing with the credentialing issue? Because what I'll say is that what they're doing here is, while these agents are very autonomous, if they ever need you to log in somewhere, they will actually ping you. You then personally have to go into your computer and type in your password, right? You can't just give them your password somewhere. And I was seeing on some forums that this is actually one of the big concerns about Grok Bot, right? Like, to what extent can you be sure that these credentials aren't being stored on these servers? I know you've like dealt with some of these like problems before with like some of your coding projects like Rotunda,
Yeah. Well, by definition, they are kind of stored in the cloud, right? Like once you log into a session with your username and password, we think of those as like the keys to the kingdom. Like those are like these golden nuggets that you really have to keep protected at all costs. That's definitely true. And browser cookies, which don't get nearly enough notoriety, are actually how the sites then authorize you once you have went through the login process. So like every single credential system, whether it's OAuth or whether it's just like a conventional username password, if it's like send an email to your account, click on some button, all of those will set a cookie on your browser that identifies, hey, this is the session that I'm authenticated to use. You pass that to the server automatically on every request. And then that's why it gives you back your own credentialed account info. That whole system is the only way that we can get private keys into the server space.
Sure. Yeah.
And it happens with every request by default. That's just how browsers are designed.
Yeah.
It seems obvious that you would never give me your credentials to Fidelity, right? Like you would never give me the Richard Deal at gmail.com.
Well, if you ask
right?
nicely, I might.
Please.
Sure.
Please. But like, you're probably not going to give me those.
Sure.
Cookies, on the other hand, you're like, oh, well, what's the worst that cookie's going to do, right? Like it sounds so friendly. You use them for like advertising tracking.
Right.
Like once I have your cookies, I can do anything in the browser that you can when you're installed locally, which is how Grok Bot functions. I think the security issues come into play because once you've authenticated within their cloud environment, which is how they have you do it, end providers like Fidelity has no way to be able to do risk assessment on that browser session. Usually, if like you log into Fidelity, they'll keep your cookies alongside the IP that use those cookies or was authenticated to use those cookies. So if I come through with a fully different IP address, but I bring those same cookies, that sometimes will flag some fraud alert saying, hey, this is suspicious activity. I'm trying to access this from Atlanta and Richard just logged in San Francisco. That's not lining up, right?
Yep.
There must be something amiss. So they might log you out and like raise some issue. Because you have given their computer direct access to your account, there's no way for them to perform that fraud analysis, which is both the strength and the con or the downside of this approach. once you log in their computer, they can do anything in your account altogether by virtue of those browser cookies.
Interesting. So do you think these cookies end up also in the model context in some sense?
No, I think that's easy enough to strip out.
Okay.
Honestly, it's possible they inadvertently get in there. Like if you do CDP session debugging, which is when you can control Chrome programmatically, you can also just ask it for a readout of all of its cookies, and then it will give that to you.
Right. But in short, like these cookies, they live on this virtual computer.
Yeah.
The agent can do whatever it wants because it has access to these cookies, but it doesn't necessarily mean that these cookies get sent
Get read. Yeah.
get read or sent back to the server where the model is being hosted.
Yeah. Which, look, like on one hand, Grok owns both. So like if Grok wants to do something bad with your cookies,
If Grok wants, Grok gets.
Grok can get, right?
Right.
So
Sure.
I think the bigger issue with this is more that once it's in this cloud computer and these agents are working autonomously, you open yourself up to prompt injection in a way that's not as big of a concern when you're running it locally. Because the way that all computer automation basically works when it's using your browser locally is you can see what it's doing. It like literally takes control of your browser.
Yep.
It's clicking around. Maybe you can see the mouse moving. Maybe you can't. But you're very much in the loop during this interaction. If you log in with your Fidelity account, and you probably shouldn't, in this remote Grok Bot, and you tell your agent something, it might read something on some third-party website and say, hey, it'd be a really good idea if I went into Richard's brokerage account right now and transferred all of his funds out to me, the person who built this website. And like, we've gotten pretty good at being able to detect prompt injections, but we're not flawless. We're like certainly not at 100%. And by virtue of that, it opens up this like whole other surface area, this attack vector, as professionals call it.
That makes sense.
Which allows Grok Bot to do things on your behalf with those accounts that might be things that you didn't instruct it to do in the first place. And that's a pretty fundamental problem with this delegation authority of giving it access to your accounts. That's true, both for Grok as well as for all these other providers.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically saying with this guy on Reddit here that I was scrolling Reddit.
Maybe it was me.
Maybe it was you. They said audit log and compliance just aren't what Frontier Labs optimized for at launch. They're shipping to prove the category, and the buyer they're proving to isn't the one asking for it yet. So I guess like the issue is like, this might be flashy, but at the end of the day, this is the credentialing and how they actually audit whether or not these systems are working properly and keeping your data confidential, that we just don't ever see at the launch of these things. It's only found out in hindsight once these things go awry that we realize that they weren't safe.
Yeah. I'll say, I mean, my new company is doing some stuff in this space, and it's taken us years to work out the kinks of these problems.
Wow.
So it's definitely possible. I can speak to that, but like it's far less trivial than I think this early stage demo would lead you to believe.
I love it, man. All right, well that's pretty much all I got for you for Grok, man. I think TLDR, Grok is looking, things are looking pretty good over there at SpaceX.
Can I maybe add one more thing?
Sure.
Which I think is kind of how I think about these failure modes. I think we can be overly comforted sometimes by virtue of the numbers, like the performance numbers that model providers will share in some of these situations. But like the math on it is actually really simple, where if you're 99% accurate at some task, you basically do that to the amount of times that you have to do that task. And for automation, that could be in like the many tens or like many hundreds of like taking some action. How likely was it that you got it right? If you take 100 steps and it's 99% accuracy with that step, it's like, 0.99 to the 100th power. You end up being 36.6% successful of doing all of those 100 things right. And it only takes one of those things to go horribly wrong for automation to fail, or in the worst case, for you to like leak some credentials to some authorized party. And I would just flag that for people when they're thinking about solutions that are in this space. Is like, you can look at the statistics, but make sure to then interpolate the statistics for how long these things have to run autonomously. And like longer that they run, more of a chance of issues.
It's a good call out.
Last thing I'll say.
And never be too safe.
Exciting stuff in Grokland, though.
Really exciting
launching
stuff.
Satellites.
They're launching satellites. We haven't even talked about that part yet. So a lot of cool stuff that we should definitely keep a tab on.
Yeah. Our ears to the grindstone. Something like that.
Exactly.
Cool, Rich.
Well, what's going on in Anthropic land, dude?
Yeah, great segment on Grok.
Too.
I figure we could transition to another frontier provider right now, Anthropic. And they're in some hot water right now. I mean, they're gearing up for the IPO. There's a lot going on. But today I want to talk specifically about their watermarking, which they proposed this past week.
Okay.
So the EU had this announcement a couple months ago saying, if you want to serve a frontier model within the EU, we're going to mandate some requirements about watermarking the output of that AI. And like, watermarking is most obvious in the image case. That's like you could literally put some indicator in the image to indicate that it's AI generated, or more likely you end up statistically modifying these pixels in order for it to look the same, but it has some mathematical signature on top of it that proves, hey, this was produced by Gemini or this was produced by Grok. It's called SynthID, is I think Google's term for it, but that's become adopted a little bit more industry-wide. So the EU said this, you have to definitely do this for images, you have to definitely do this for videos, because we care a lot that people are not misled that these are in fact real.
This is all models have to do this.
All models have to do this that are in the EU.
Huh.
They extended that to also include text. So they said these frontier labs need to be able to figure out some way to leave some trace in text outputs as well that will allow us to reverse engineer what model it came from.
Yep.
So if you give me a paragraph, I'll be able to say as the EU Commission, hey, Richard, I'm actually saying that you wrote this whole thing with Claude instead of doing it yourself. So a lot of question marks around how companies would end up doing this.
Do you know how long they gave them to do this?
So yeah, so the timeline, the draft was published back in December of last year, December 17th. It's called The Code of Practice on Transparency of AI-Generated Content.
I like that your accent got a little bit more British there.
Yeah, thank you.
I
appreciate it. Well,
beautiful.
I guess they're no longer part of the EU anymore,
that's
but
true.
it got vaguely European,
Yeah.
which is probably as specific of an accent as I can do. It was finalized on June 10th of this year,
Okay.
which is actually a pretty fast turnaround time from June to now in August. Anthropic coming out and saying like, yes, we're going to support this as a first-class citizen. July, I guess there was some like signatory period that was also associated with this where companies had to sign on to this regulation, or at least got to choose to. Anthropic signed on in July.
They get to choose to do this.
I don't know if they get to choose to, but maybe it was just their way of saying, hey, we know we have to do this and we're just going to agree that we are going to do it. I think that's probably more what it was. So Anthropic signs, Microsoft, Google, Meta, OpenAI are also all on that list. The Article 5 transparency obligations took effect August 2nd of this year, right?
Yep.
So if you put a system on the market before that date, you're kind of grandfathered in to not have to do these watermark changes.
Oh, but any model
2nd.
released in the last like 2 weeks,
yes, has to.
We'll have to have
in
this.
theory, has
Okay,
to have this
gotcha.
if it's shipped in the EU, which is also the nuance of like you could just not deploy it for the EU,
Sure,
and then technically get around this too. But Anthropic says, yes, we agree this is the right way to do it. We're going to add some watermarking Claude. We're going to get into exactly how they're doing that, the technical nitty-gritty, but they're going to do it worldwide, which is causing this outcry because even if we're not in the EU, we're not subject to this. It's a case of this Brussels effect where like this EU regulation is causing an industry change that's happening worldwide. And Anthropic saying that all of their future models that are going to be released will be released with this watermarking technique.
Yep.
And that's true whether we live in the US, whether we live in New Zealand or Southeast Asia. And it's also obviously going to happen in the EU.
Yep.
So Anthropic's doing this. You might think like, okay, well, how do you do this watermark? Are you going to put some invisible, a little
bit of ink?
Unicode character?
Yeah.
You smudge the like H letter a little bit. There's some criterion within the EU regulation that say that you have to be able to pass this through different copying stages, including OCR, right? So if I have some piece of text and I transcribe it 1-to-1 on like a typewriter, it still needs to pass along this watermark from the original text.
Interesting.
So you're like, well, how the hell am I going to do that? Like text is text. I don't even have the like.
It is crazy that they said like, this is what you guys have to do. Like innovate now.
Yeah, like figure it out.
Yeah, go for it.
I think it helps that there had been extending research and like precedent for doing watermarking on text. I don't know if they would have figured this out a priori, but that was the mandate. So then the result of that is that Anthropic is rolling out this statistical sampling approach for doing watermarking.
But they're copying what Google released.
They're basically copying what Google released. Do you want to talk a little bit about how they're doing it?
Yeah, sure. So this technique is actually not something that, as we were talking about, Anthropic created. It actually comes out of a paper that Google wrote in Nature a couple of years back, where they were talking about, how can we inject like this watermark into text? And so this technique that they came up with is called SynthID-Text. For the sake of this conversation, I think the most important thing to understand is that when you are using a model, when you're interacting with a model, there's actually two things that are happening in parallel that let you see the text. So you send a request to the model. The model parses your input, sends it through the model, and then what comes out is the model then predicts for each of the tokens that it's generating, for each of the words that it's generating, the most likely next sequence of words, right? So if you have the word like, what is 2 plus 2 equal? The model will see that input. And then at the very end, it'll have some likelihood over what the next most likely word is. And you can actually visualize this. You'll see that for all words that aren't 4 in this case, the probability is like 0.000001.
Yeah,
And then there'll be like a
tremendously small.
99.99999% probability on the word 4. And the model then sends that distribution over how likely the next word is to a sampler, right? And the sampler then will sample from that distribution what it thinks the next word is. So in this case, it's a very simple example. The sampler would say, oh, well, look, like basically there's 99.999% probability that the word is 4. So I'm just going to say that the next word should be 4, right?
Mhm.
But let's say that, you have a sentence like, hey, today the weather is very blank. Here, like the input to the sampler might be a probability distribution where words like sunny and rainy and cloudy are all like maybe 5% likely, right? And it's the sampler's job then to determine, okay, well, what word do I want to pick such that the user has the best possible user experience, right? And it might be the most likely word, like maybe cloudy has a probability of 5% and sunny has a probability of 4%. And so it'll say the word cloudy in that case. But maybe it sometimes switches it up a little bit, right? Maybe it experiments. Maybe every now and then it picks the third most likely word or the second most likely word, right?
Well, and it usually does, right? Because in the case where it's just taking the top score every time, that's like greedy
That would be
decoding,
greedy,
basically,
exactly, yeah.
which is
Yep.
taking the argmax, like the most likely value every
Yep,
single time.
exactly.
The way that most models tend to work, or most samplers tend to work, when you hear terms like the temperature of this the sampler or the top P of the sampler, basically what it's doing is saying, I'm going to take all of that output distribution and put it on a number line.
Yep.
So like in that case, I'm going to do like 5% here. This is a better explainer actually if you're on YouTube,
Yeah.
which I'll say, like and subscribe this episode if you are. Really helps us out. You have 5% here, you 5% here, you 5% there, and then the long tail of really small things. You're basically just like choosing a random point on this number line, and that's going to be your answer. So you assume if something has a ton of probability mass, almost every single time you choose that random point, it's going to be on that thing, right? Because it has the most proportion of the number line. If in this 5% case, you can kind of pick like any of the 5%, and it almost has an equal likelihood of like doing that over time, the more that you run these models.
Yeah, and if folks are curious, like nowadays, actually, you'll see like nucleus sampling as a very popular one. Top K sampling is kind of like what everyone uses. And you can combine that into even fancier sampling techniques like Bayesian, like posterior decoding. Like there's a bunch of research on, given some probability distribution, how do you pick the best possible next word, right?
That's
and
right.
that might not be the most likely next word. There's kind of a differentiator there. So anyway, these two things are totally separate. So you got your model and then you have your sampler, and these two things are sort of separate. Here, the idea with this Google paper, how you inject a watermark, is not actually by injecting it into the model at all. The model is the same, but you just play around with the sampler a little bit, this tiny little layer on top that you add to the model to inject the watermark to that sampling, so that once you then have the output of a model, you can then say, oh, the words that were sampled by this model seem like they were sampled from a Claude sampler or a OpenAI sampler, right? But I want to distinguish here. It's actually really important to point out, like, nothing is changing in the model itself. It's just the sampling of the words.
Yeah.
And so it gets a little mathy here, but what you can do is you can inject basically sort of this like random hash almost.
A secret key
into the sampler, so that on average, the sampler is still doing a good job of selecting the next likely word. But if you look at a very long piece of text over the course of many, many words that are sampled, you can say, hey, well, this kind of smells of the sampler that Anthropic would use, or this smells of the sampler that OpenAI would use, right? The text is still high quality text. It's still the same text that you would expect from these models, but something's just a little bit funky about how the sampler selected what the word should be, right? There's like a slight preference for something over something else. And so over the course of, many, many tokens, you can start kind of piecing apart with a certain probability. Okay, this is most likely Claude Sonnet 4.
Yeah.
Or this is most likely Opus 5, right? So that's kind of the big bird's eye view of this.
Yeah, great explanation. So Google's been doing this for a while, like I mentioned. Anthropic is pretty new to this game, but I think this broke through in a way that it never had with Gemini models. I suspect maybe because Gemini is much more of a consumer product. Claude's based for enterprise, and professional writers also very much prefer Claude. I think Google was maybe a little quieter about this approach in some ways. And it's been on Gemini for forever. It's been on them since 2024. So maybe just by the time people started learning about AI and using it, it was already there, it was baked in. This ignited an absolute shitstorm of people who are like, how dare you add this bias to this pipeline, be it the model or be it the sampler? And how dare you add that to API? How dare you add that to code? And how dare you add that to like other downstream harnesses that use Claude? Anthropic's like, well, that's just kind of part of the model now. That's just how we're doing things. I read a pretty good piece on this from John Gruber, who is this, Apple blogger, or at least has been in the past, is writing a lot more about AI these days.
Yep.
And really just deeply cares about the art of writing. Like this guy is a writer. He like sees it's been his career for forever, like doing this blog. And he published this piece on Sunday with an absolute teardown of Anthropic's argument here and their model, basically. And I encourage people to read it. I think it's well written. I don't fully agree, but I do want to give my sense of his representation of the arguments kind of against this watermarking approach are. A lot of it hinges, I think, for like him as a professional writer around this idea that even if words are close, they don't actually carry the same identical meaning. You know what I mean? Of like, he leaped at the chance is not the same as he jumped at the opportunity. They do like, again, same kind of nut semantics, but like the syntactics of actually how you phrase it have some subtleties that like would matter in a longer piece, for instance. And when he's using these models, he's trying to use the models to act as a tool for him as a user, much like a hammer, or much like a carpentry set. And like what he thinks the best interests for him are choosing the best words given the best times and doing that subject to cost and latency concerns. Like at the extrema, it might not be possible to get the perfect word every time, but the balance that model providers should be doing is on this axis of like, well, how much are they charging you for the service? And then how fast are you able to deliver the results? And then everything else, like given that frontier, should basically maximize for CE loss in some sense of like, what is the best next thing to happen here, which is what we're trying to do. And like this sampling biases that in order to like give things that are like not as good, basically, is like his core argument. He said some other things in this post as well, from the fact that, Google's analysis of this kind of pointed to people's feedback on the text, giving thumbs up or thumbs down, and him being like, well, one, people are stupid. That was actually an argument that he made in the piece. And secondarily,
I like that. That's his like opening salvo.
That's the core, dude. That's the nut. I think we can all agree
that people are inherently
average person
dumb.
is stupid.
Okay,
and that thumbs up, thumbs down evidence as like a feedback mechanism is inherently weak. That part I agree with. Incidentally, like it's a very bad way to get kind of qualitative feedback from people. You'd only ever downvote it if it's like super, super wrong.
Sure.
If it's like hallucinating or it's very much the wrong answer. If it's like a subtle word choice, you're probably not even going to take the time of day. I kind of want to like go into the technical core of his argument being the fact that it's choosing the wrong word. Potentially it's like choosing the most unlikely word over time, because that felt like the piece of things that was most incompatible with my understanding of that sampling process that you were just describing. Right?
It is. Yeah. Let me actually answer this by giving you a story or a quick analogy. Right. So basically when we were in college, we would work on these, this is like back in like 2017, 2016, right? We'd work on these projects where we were using very, very simple neural networks at the time to generate text. And these models were really bad. And we hadn't quite figured, both the models were bad and the sampling techniques were really bad for generating text, right? And I remember I was working on this one project where we were trying to generate optimal Airbnb descriptions.
I remember this.
Remember this, right? We were trying to generate optimal Airbnb descriptions that could help, landlords optimally rent out their Airbnbs, right? So the idea is like, okay, given some bad description you might have written, can we generate a better description for you that is more likely to, get interest from folks? And so as we trained this model, the model itself was actually learning pretty well. Like you would look at the loss function, the loss would go down. The model is good at predicting what the next likely token is. But we were using all these very simple sampling approaches. And what ends up happening when you sample from a model and just predict the most next likely token is the model will start predicting tokens that it thinks are good, but will then overfit to just predicting that token. So what ends up happening is in our model, you would end up with descriptions like, hey, beautiful, 2-bedroom loft in Brooklyn with great parking, and the parking is amazing with great parking over the river with great parking and tons of parking So you can park
Parking,
anywhere
parking,
where there's
parking,
parking, and parking, and parking is important, and parking. And we would be like, well, why is this the case? And you would look at the distribution of words, and hey, turns out that if you offer someone free parking on Airbnb, that's a great description. People will like to click on that, right? And so the model is looking at, okay, well, what are the words that I have at my disposal? What's the most next likely word that might get people's attention?
Yeah.
Hey, parking, right? But what ends up happening, if you're just solving this local equation, right, this like local preference, if you're trying to optimize people's attention, but just by looking at the most next likely word, you'll end up with something completely incoherent, right? So you do need to think about, okay, well, given everything I've said so far and given the distribution over words, what is now a good sampling approach? And that might not actually be the most next likely token. You might actually have to do something slightly smarter. So in the last 10 years, we've gotten better sampling approaches. Now people are doing much fancier things. And in part, that's why when we interact with these models, we actually get text that sounds very coherent and very fluid. We're not sampling the most next likely token, right? In some sense, when we look at how should we continue a sentence, the model is doing some deep math and introspection into, okay, well, what is the user experience that I want the user to have? And let me sample the token from that sort of meta distribution, right? Not the most next likely word, but the distribution over how can I make sure that users will keep using the platform? And that is already happening, right? So here, when he's saying like, okay, well, the model should generate the token that is the most likely, if that is his argument, it's just incoherent. Like it doesn't really make sense, right? Because that's not what we're doing currently.
Yeah.
And so adding this watermarking there, it's not changing the fact that already we're not doing the most next likely token. We're already doing something much more complicated than that, right? So I think this might be one of those scenarios where you really have to dig into the weeds to understand how the sampling works to then really realize that sampling is so complicated already. This watermarking makes it a little bit more complicated, but I don't think it fundamentally changes your user experience with these models.
Yeah. The thing is, you fundamentally don't want your model to be taking the next most likely thing. That's going to result in bad writing.
You don't.
It's actually the stochasticity of the generation process that ends up leading to fluid text.
The model's only job is to generate a distribution over words. That's all it does. The sampler then is the thing that takes that distribution and renders that into a good user experience for you. And these two things are separate.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's also one of the most famously hard tasks to benchmark is creative writing because it's so subjective. It's like the best way that we have right now, unlike coding, unlike a lot of these automation tasks, to determine whether or not the textual output of a model is good is by showing it to human beings and being like, do you prefer text A or text B? Just like on the merits of the piece, like consider everything holistically together. We have not yet been able to find some like automatic way or some like couple of principles that we can apply to text in order to say like, this is good, this is bad, which also means that if you're tweaking around with the sampler, even if you're not adding watermarking, we really don't have good feedback systems in place, unlike with regular model training, to be able to decide, yes, the sampler is better than this one. It's a lot of heuristics. It's a lot of like anecdotal evidence, a lot of like the decisions of the research teams that are going into this. So all of that said, basically where I net out on this is I think technically, I don't feel like in a gut feel like Anthropic is compromising the value proposition of Claude in order to be able to do this. I think that the output, even if you are doing creative writing, based on what I'm seeing just with the math and the math alone, it's only going to perturb the outputs than like maybe what would have been most likely with another sampling schema in like these like pretty limited niche, really like coin toss situations. In which case you were basically doing a coin toss anyway previously.
Yeah.
It's just changing like one of these internal
right.
gears to make it a little bit more like likely that you do one thing or another, and only doing that on like an aggregate of a bunch of texts.
Exactly.
So I think the technical things I feel a little bit better on in terms of like how they're implementing this. If this isn't going to result in a worse model that we actually end up using. I'm sure some writers will like probably nitpick with that, but like just again, based on the math and like how things sample, I feel pretty strongly in that. I think the other things, the more like societal ramifications here, I almost think are more interesting, right? And the two that I want to pick your brain on are the first one, which is why Anthropic decided to roll this out worldwide instead of the EU. They give some very half-assed argument in their documentation around like, they just don't have the technical nuance to be able to do things by geography, to which I say, look at IP addresses,
Sure, yeah.
do KYC
Yeah.
compliance, like
Mhm.
look at a credit card. That feels like kind of the easiest thing actually to do to be able to say if people are in the EU or not. But like, what do you think? Like, is that a choke of them releasing this worldwide? Or do you feel like they believe that watermarking is actually the way of the future? Therefore, they should, even if it wasn't regulated.
I think the big one here is China. Like, we haven't even talked about them, right? I think right now Anthropic is very deeply worried that people are stealing their thinking traces.
Mm.
And, you don't have to be in China to steal Anthropic's thinking traces. You could do that in Africa. You could do that in Europe. You can do that in, South America. You could do that in Australia.
And in fact, a lot of people are. Did you see the article about these people in Africa that are being recruited?
I did, yeah. Everyone is stealing thinking traces, right? So Anthropic is probably saying, hey, let's kill two birds with one stone. Let's just throw watermarks everywhere. And that's going to make us much more likely and make it much easier to catch folks stealing our thinking traces. Because now we can show, like, pretty decisively, like, no, this is a thinking trace that came from Anthropic. So if we see this floating around in the ether in the wild somewhere, we can identify that, right? That is honestly, I think, where the buck stops. Like, that is the only argument that I think Anthropic really cares about.
Yeah.
And everything else is, I think, semantic sugar a little bit, how you want to frame this.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And they're doing that with the intuition that if you train on these thinking traces, it'll keep echoing this watermark for new things.
Maybe. Or if these thinking traces are leaked somewhere, then you can prove that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So why not?
That's a good point. I didn't think of that. The other thing was whether or not you're worried of people getting inadvertently flagged as AI for content that either they wrote originally and just had AI proofread, or they've embedded some quote in an article that was AI generated, but because there's enough of it, it like flags this filter that the whole thing was AI.
Interesting. So, and you're saying that is useful to Anthropic because
I'm saying that was one of Gruber's other concerns.
I see.
Was him basically saying if he's writing his blog, even if he's doing it fully by hand, if he's quoting someone who used AI that does have this watermark, it's kind of like a poison pill. It's like, that means that if you were to look at his whole site, I think depending on how the classifier is built a little bit, but if it's purely a binary classifier that says this piece of content is written by AI or this piece of content is not, instead of like a per word basis, if you send an email with an AI quote, or if you write a blog post with an AI quote, you can potentially get blocked or demoted on that piece or flagged as plagiarism by virtue of using an AI quote that wasn't even yours in the first place.
Maybe. I mean, that doesn't really concern me or like worry me too much. I mean, that sounds like just a classifier issue, right? Like, you could at some point build a better classifier that goes paragraph by paragraph or sentence by sentence and just says, okay, is this sentence AI generated? Like, that seems technically quite easy to do.
I don't know about sentence because you need at least 200 words to activate, but it's certainly per paragraph level. Yeah.
Or like a rolling window or something like that. Right.
Yeah. That's a good point too.
Yeah.
Cool. Any additional thoughts on this?
I mean, this is exciting, man. This was actually one of those questions that I thought would be really hard to solve. Like the technique for watermarking, maybe 5-10 years ago, I thought would be a very hard thing to do. Now that it's not only solved, or I mean, it seems to be almost solved, but that it feels so trivial is interesting. It's almost like, how when SpaceX started landing the boosters and everyone was like, whoa, we can do that?
Totally.
This feels like that to me a little bit, where this felt like one of those things that would be really, really hard to do in our lifetimes. And now that it's here, it's kind of trivial. It's like, oh yeah, of course we can watermark these models. That's not a big deal.
Yeah, totally. I think it's impressive technically. I think I'm a little bit worried about how far ranging some of these classifiers are going to be applied to people's text. Like, I think getting caught in this dragnet of being mistakenly classified.
Well, dude, I just assume everything is AI written at this point. Well, that solves it,
Keep your standards low, I guess. They'll always be met.
Well, as in, like, I just assume that everyone's using AI, everything's written by AI, but then I hope that you're reviewing it, and then that what you've written has been reviewed by you and has your stamp of approval,
I think that is overly ambitious for what people tend to do on the outputs of AI, but I agree in principle. Why I'm actually optimistic to some degree about watermarking is because I so often get an AI smell from content that people write and send to me, but I'm not sure. Like, I'll maybe run it through GPT-0 or like some of these other detection services, and it comes back with some AI score. Those are like super easy to fool or to get wrong. I think that there's, like, to some degree in the workplace, at least, something nice about being able to say, hey, this piece of what I wrote was AI implicitly, without people having to like self-report that. And this piece was actually my original thinking. But I think just my TLDR is I really do hope we get back to people putting more effort into writing, both the thinking process as well as the eventual output. Clay had a really good letter on this last week. All policies that I agree with myself of like draft things yourselves, really write it. If you do use something AI, you should like really read every sentence and stand by it. You should never disregard what AI has written after the fact because you're wasting other people's time. So I feel like we're still kind of like learning our relationship with AI writing tools and how to bridge us doing things and them and then passing that to other people to consume too. So like, this is one thing, but I think that the hate that it's getting online is not warranted personally.
I agree.
Certainly like for EU use cases, I probably would have geofenced it, but that's just me. Very last thing that I'll do for the hour, Rich, is Chamath, founder of Social Capital.
Sure.
There's a photo of him online
Turtleneck guy?
and his turtleneck.
Yeah.
Going absolutely wild. So I just want to ask you, we can put up a picture here. I just want to ask you, are you in the market for a turtleneck this season? And if so, what color would you like for your birthday?
Ooh, you know what? Maybe we'll that might be in a 10-year from now kind of situation.
Got it.
I do think he has just so firmly planted his stake, his flag in this turtleneck game that, if we were a turtleneck now, I don't think you can seem like you're not copying him. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where, so we had Steve Jobs, right? And now he has been able to supplant the turtleneck god status. So I think we'll have to give it 10 years before I can actually give it a stab at being a turtleneck guy.
Comes in waves.
Yeah, it comes in waves, And
until then, you're doing your short sleeve button downs.
I might just do, short sleeves, dude. Yeah, short sleeve button downs.
Okay, well, we'll see.
But I appreciate it, buddy.
During your birthday season, you might get something under the tree. I don't know. Awesome, Rich. Good
All
job.
right, broski.
Yeah,
I'll see you next week.
Soon. Later, man.
Bye.